Good day, my name is Sky, and I appreciate you spending some study time with me. I'm here to help you make money in online poker by teaching you key strategies and getting you to take action. This is the one that you've been waiting for. 16 tips to help you win more from the fish. Gambate!
Should be a piece of cake.
Dad, let's go fishing.
To help you take notes with the 16 tips you're about to learn, go to smartpokerstudy.com/pod525. All 16 tips are going to be listed right there for you, along with some additional resources. And please do me a favor, as soon as you hear a great tip that you are going to use in your session tonight, click that thumbs up button and let me know which tip it is in the comments below. Tip number 1, table select to find the fish. Now, you need to be above the fishing hole to win fishy chips. No fish under the hole ain't gonna catch any fish, right? In general, I look for 2 or more fish on the table. That's a good sign. 4 or more is a great sign. I love those tables. The more fish on your tables, the more profit potential they hold. Tip number 2, spot the fish. You're looking for players with a VPIP of greater than 30%. You want limpers. You want to see their calling with weak hands or draws when they get to showdown. Really good signs that you're up against a fish. Other great signs, well, they start with the short stack. They open raise and call far too often, especially when out of position. And maybe you only see at showdown, they're only betting with strong hands. Tip number 3, get the fish to yourself. That means you open raise when they are in the blinds. You raise after they limp in. You defend the big blind when you can be heads up versus their open raise. And of course, when they open raise, you 3-bet them. When you get the fish to yourself, you have a better chance of exploiting them and earning their chips. Speaking of earning chips, tip number 4, value bet like mad. One of my favorite sayings, get value while the getting's good. Sometimes you'll encounter a situation like this. A 54/2 player limps in under the gun. Yeah, limping under the gun, 54/2, absolute fish. You ISO raise with ace 10 suited in an effort to get him all to yourself. Remember, tip number 3, everyone else folds and that fish limps and then calls for 7 big blinds from out of position. Loving this spot right now. We get a board of 4, 10, 7, monotone, all spades. You have the ace of clubs, 10 of clubs. So top pair, top kicker. He checks to you. You got to get value while the getting's good, right? You have a great hand. They're a fish. Value bet and expect them to call. So we bet a little bit over half pot, and then he ends up calling. Before you make your value bet, think about what he could call. Well, he could easily call weaker 10s, sometimes just a 7 with any random spade. 7-6 offsuit with the 7 of clubs, and the 6 of spades can call on this 3-spade board. A couple overcards with the ace of spades, the king of spades, the queen of spades, the jack of spades as well. So much stuff that we're getting value out of. So he calls. The pot on the turn is 31.5 big blinds. Another 10 hits, giving you trip 10s with an ace kicker. The board is 4, 10, 7, 10, 3 spades. He checks. Get value while the getting's good. Do not slow play at a point like this. If you check behind right now with 3 spades on the board, you're allowing him to get to the river with the deuce of spades to crack your top trips. So you bet 21 into 31.5, 2/3 pot, and he calls you. The river comes a rather blank 6 of diamonds, making the final board 4, 10, 7, 10, 6 with 3 spades. You've got the trip 10s with an ace. He checks to you. His stack is 58.7 big blinds. You have 58.5. The pot is 73.5 big blinds. You got to get value while the getting's good. Let's shove it in right here. He calls us for his entire stack. He had the king 7 of diamonds when he limped and then called from out of position. Second pair on a monotone board. He didn't have a flush draw, so he called flop turn river for his entire 100 big blind stack. You did a great job. You value bet like mad, and you got value while the getting's good. Tip number 5, play solid, floppable hands versus the fish. You want hands that hit strong top pairs, sets, so pocket pairs, of course. You want to have the flush draw possibility and the straight draw possibilities as well. A pretty decent range would be every single Broadway, every single pocket pair, every single ace, king deuce suited and above, 6-5 suited and above, 10-8 suited and above, and then the Queen 9 suited as well. Now I'm giving you 16 quick tips to win more from the fish. I highly recommend that you go to the show notes page, smartpokerstudy.com/pod525, so you can download the 28 exploits versus player types PDF. So today, obviously, we're just talking about fish. But once you get this PDF, I cover the 4 different player types: the tight passive players, the tight aggressive, the loose aggressive, and the loose passive fish. For each of these 4 player types, I give 7 characteristics, or the things that they often do within that player type, and then 7 ways to exploit each of those characteristics. So beyond just exploiting fish, I help you exploit the lags, the tags, and the nits as well. So once again, go to smartpokerstudy.com/pod525 to pick this bad boy up. Tip number 6, it's okay to fold and avoid bad spots versus the fish. You want the fish to yourself, but something feels off about this situation. Maybe there are 3-bet bluffers still to act after you ISO raise or even open raise. Maybe you're going to be out of position trying to isolate the fish. Or maybe that fish just has a really tiny stack. You don't have a great hand. You don't have much room to maneuver post-flop. So be fine with folding because there are always fish. And because you are table selecting, remember tip number 1, table select to find the fish, you're going to have plenty of opportunities in the future to ISO raise the fish in better opportunities. Tip number 7 is to 3-bet bluff versus those frequent isolation raisers. You want to look for tight aggressive and loose aggressive players who are just like you. They want the fish all to themselves. You can exploit their desire to exploit the fish. So what you're going to do, for example, right here, somebody limps into the pot, a 15/9 tight aggressive player ISO raises. You look at the situation. Yeah, you have ace-4 suited, but you're paying attention. Oh, what is this tight aggressive player making it 4 big blinds over a limper with? Well, there's a good chance he has a very wide range, maybe that 32% roughly range that I showed you earlier. If that's his range, he is folding a ton of hands versus a 3-bet. And I've got a pretty decent suited ace-4. Let's go ahead and make the 3-bet 13 big blinds. Everybody folds. We pick up a lovely little pot because we noticed a limper is weak and a tight aggressive player probably has a wide ISO raising range. So you want a 3-bet bluff in spots like this with suited aces, and connected aces gives you that straight draw, flush draw potential plus the ace blocking hand. And you want to bet to a size that hits their pain threshold. So generally 3 to 5x. If he goes 4, you go 13, that's good enough to convince him to fold with a majority of his ISO raising hands. Tip number 8 is to pay attention to their short stacks. Now, when SPR is less than 3, they may be committed. So SPR is stack to pot ratio. So for example, if the pot is 20 and the stack is 40, the SPR is 2 to 1 or just 2. Your opponent is pretty darn committed. The pot's already 40. They only have 20 behind. So use this stack to pot ratio to get them all in when you have your best hands and they cannot find a fold, or just don't bluff when that fold equity is really low due to a low stack to pot ratio. Tip number 9 now, listen to what their actions are telling you. Fish in general, you know this, they love calling pre-flop and post-flop, and they often wake up with aggression when they hit their hand. If they have something weak, maybe they'll call you flop, turn, and river, but when they river that killer hand, that's when they come out firing. So we all know situations like this one here. We get a limper 35/5 player under the gun, and we ISO raise with 5-6 suited. We make it 4 big blinds, a couple of folds, and the limper calls. The pot on the flop is 9.4 big blinds. The flop comes king, king, 5. We have 5, 6, 4, a second pair. I guess you could think of it as a 2-pair hand, kings and 5s. And your opponent checks. He's a fish. He likely didn't hit anything on this board, but just in case he wants to stick around, maybe has a couple of mid cards, a queen, jack with a king on the board, has kind of like backdoor potential. We bet 4.4 into the 9.4, and he ends up calling. The turn comes a 7 of diamonds, making the board king, king, 5, 7 with 2 diamonds, and your fishy opponent who limp called pre-flop, check called on the flop, comes out firing 13.6 into 18.2. A hefty bet. So we got to ask ourselves, what's he doing this with? Well, in general, when a fish like this comes out firing, and if he's the kind of player that is just happy folding on the flop, he's folded so far 2 out of 3 times, and he called you on the flop, he probably had something worthy of continuing. Now he comes out firing for a hefty bet, like I said, 13.6 into 18.2. All you have is a weak, now third pair hand? Yeah, let's listen to what his actions are telling us, and let's just exit the hand at this point. So you want to fold your hand when necessary, and don't call to bluff catch a fish. Because super loose passive fish like this, 35/5, who folds most of the time on the flop, they're only going to wake up with aggression on a really strong hand. Now for tip number 10, barrel bluff through their honest street. Fish can find a fold, but you want to pay attention to their HUD statistics. Which street is their fold to c-bet greater than 60%? Make sure you can bet through that street. So if your opponent is honest on the flop at folding at 67%, at least make that initial flop c-bet bluff. Now, of course, you want to watch out for that stack to pot ratio, because if your opponent folds on the flop 20%, folds on the turn 20%, but folds on the river 80%, you have to be willing to triple barrel bluff this player before you even make your flop c-bet. If he only has 20 big blinds left in his stack, are you really going to be able to put the pressure on him without him being committed all the way through to the river? Probably not. So avoid those low stack to pot ratio bluffing situations when they are honest on later streets. Now, tip number 11, if they ain't folding, you ain't bluffing. This is a key concept to ingrain into your noggin when you're up against those fish, because fish are calling stations. They don't fold with any piece of a wet board. So instead of bluffing them, value bet huge on those wet boards. Tip number 12, if you hold a weak draw and they let you see the next street for free, go ahead and take it. You don't have to bluff just because they check it to you. And this is one of the ways that you can exploit the fish that a lot of players or a lot of coaches potentially don't even talk about. Because the fish, they're calling stations street by street, right? But they also slow play too often and they miss out on value when they hit their hand. They love checking and letting you bet. So if you hold that weak draw, like an under gut shot, and they check to you on the turn, go ahead and check back. Especially if you suspect that they might have hit something on that turn. Get yourself that free river and only bluff if you believe they can find a fold once they check to you. Now, tip number 13, do not slow play when you make your hand. This is crucial. You don't want to make those slow playing errors that the fish do. They love calling to catch your bluffs, or they love calling because they think their one pair hand is good. Earn their chips when this is a case. For example, you open raise in the cutoff with Queen Jack offsuit. Button folds, small blind calls, maybe he's a 36-21 player, so plays a ton of hands at 36%, can be aggressive at times as well, and then the big blind folds, so you're in position, Queen Jack offsuit versus a fish. The flop comes down King, King, 9 with a couple of clubs, you have the Jack of clubs and the Queen of spades, so you've got a gut shot. He checks to you, you bet 3.4 into 7, just trying to make that initial bluff. Hopefully he folds. If he doesn't have a king on the King, King, 9, nor a 9, nor a couple of clubs for a flush draw, there's a good chance he's just going to fold and exit this hand from out of position. But he ends up check calling you. The pot on the turn is 13.8 big blinds, and the 10 of spades hits. You made your straight with your Queen Jack on the King, King, 9, 10, but there's still a couple of clubs out there. He checks to you. Now, a huge mistake right now would be to check behind, because now you're allowing him to see a free river to catch you with another queen or a jack to maybe chop for a straight, or maybe he'll hit his flush draw if he has a couple of clubs right now. And if he has trip kings on this King, King, 9, 10 board and you have a straight, you're letting him potentially hit a full house to beat your straight on that river. You have to value bet. So you bet 10 into 13.8 and he calls you. Awesome. The river comes an absolute blank 5 of spades, making the final board King, King, 9, 10, 5. You have your straight. He checks. You bet 2/3 pot again, 22 into 33.8, and he ends up calling you. Sweet. You get to showdown. You show your winning hand, but sometimes you don't get to see what they have because they muck their hand. But suffice it to say, you got maximum value out of your turn straight because you bet turn, bet river. You did not slow play at any point. Tip number 14 here. Take your hand off your mouse for those growing pots. Sometimes that pot is growing, you flop top set, but all of a sudden, on the turn or the river, the 4th straight card hits, the 3rd flush card hits, and he comes out firing. And you say to yourself, oh, this fish does not have it. I don't care if he just 5x'd my bet or bet full pot on this river. I call with my top pair hand. Boom, you call, your dreams are dashed. He crushed you because you didn't take the time to really think through what his bet was trying to tell you. Remember, tip number 9, listen to what their actions are telling you. And oftentimes, because you're up against a fish, you have to work to avoid that entitlement tilt or even revenge tilt or just that hatred of fish tilt. Take your hand off your mouse, think through the situation, especially when it's a growing pot, because even fish hit great hands, so you need to listen to their actions. Tip number 15. This is a study tip, something to do away from your playtime. I want you to hand read with hands versus fish with surprising showdown hands. So they got there to the river with 7 deuce offsuit. They had turned a 2-pair hand. When you see that showdown, you think to yourself, holy cow, he had that? Tag that hand right there. Later on during your study time, do a full hand reading exercise with Flopzilla Pro, where you are putting them on a pre-flop range and then narrowing that range through the streets. This is going to help you learn their ranges and see potential signs that they actually had a very strong hand when you put them on a weak hand. And then you can ask yourself through that hand reading exercise, what could I have done differently to avoid my fate? And that takes us to the final tip, number 16. This is a mindset tip. Don't let the fish winning full stacks send you on tilt. And that can kind of happen, and it ties into the entitlement tilt and revenge tilt we often feel. I want you to keep in mind that it's great when fishy play is rewarded. They're calling with their 7 deuce offsuit out of the small blind, and then they turn their 2-pair hand. Awesome. That fishy winning play builds their chips. They're not experiencing bad consequences for bad play. This is what keeps them coming back for more. Be grateful that these fish are winning, because eventually they will hand their chips to you. And as long as you're following all 16 tips on this list, you will take their chips. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video if you liked the video, subscribe for more, and leave a comment down below with your favorite tip out of these 16. And I'll see you in the next one.